Good morning. Today is the 22nd day of Elul, the 8th of September. We're up to the 6th and 7th final readings of these two parshot together, Nitzavim-Vayeilech. And there's a lot of very, very interesting topics in the 6th and 7th readings. I think that the one that is, without a doubt, the most intriguing in the end is the question of, or the topic of, the resurrection of the dead. And someone who would read this would say, how is this connected? Doesn't seem to be any connection. But the whole topic of resurrection of the dead is discussed in the final chapter of the tractate of Sanhedrin. And there in, I believe it's page 90, 91, the Mishnah begins that Kol Yisrael Yeshlem Chelek L'Olam Haba, that all the Jews, all the people of Israel have a portion in the world to come. By the way, this was it also appears in many books that it's not only the souls of the Jewish people, but it says very clearly that Chasidei Umot Ha'olam Yeshlem Chelek L'Olam Haba, meaning the souls of the righteous of the nations of the world also have a portion in the world to come. There's a lot to be said about that. It was discussed. I refer you in some length to what we wrote in Rav Ginsburg's book called Kabbalah and Meditation for the Nations. There's a whole discussion there. I don't want to get into that part of it. But how is it related here? So there, if you open up on page 90 and on, you'll see that there are 22 different verses brought by the sages to show that the resurrection of the dead is not just something that is a popular belief. It's not something that was only maybe borrowed from somewhere else, but this is something that the Torah at least alludes to. And one of the verses that is quoted is a verse in our reading, and I'll read it first how it reads when you don't think about it in that sense. And he says like this: sorry, I lost it for a second. Here it is. God said to Moses, "Behold, you are to lie with your forefathers and arise. And this nation will rise up and stray after the deities of the nation." So if you're following in the Vishnevsky Chumash or any Chumash, you'll see that I changed it a little bit, because this is exactly what the teaching is based on. How do you punctuate the sentence, this verse? Do you read it as, and I'll read it now to you from the Talmud. Again, this is Sanhedrin, page 90b, and it says, the Romans asked Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania, from where is it derived that God revives the dead? And they asked him another question, which apparently they thought is tied together. It's very interesting. And how do we know that he knows what is destined to be? Foreknowledge. Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania said to them, both of these matters are derived from the same verse, as it is stated, and God said to Moses, "Behold, you shall lie with your fathers and arise." And then it says, this people will go astray. So two things it tells us. First of all, that Moses will die and then arise from the dead. And then secondly, that he knows that the people will go astray. So he knows both things. So that was the answer that was offered, and it's from this verse. So the Romans, they knew some Hebrew, and they asked, but perhaps the verse should be divided in a different manner. You should read it, "Behold, you shall lie with your fathers," and the arise doesn't pertain to Moses, but rather to the second part of the verse, "V'kam ha'am hazeh v'zana," and this people will arise and go astray after the foreign gods of the land. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanani said to them, take at least half in your hands, that God knows what is destined to be. Okay, so there's another story here with Rabbi Yochanan. He said in the name of Rashbi, of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, from where do we know that God revives the dead? And he brings our verse with the reading that it is Moses who is going to be rising from the dead, and not the people will arise to be led astray. I mentioned that there's 22 different seemingly allusions that the sages bring from the Pentateuch, from the prophets, from the writings, for this very important topic. Why is it so important? Why do we care if there is a resurrection of the dead or not? On the face of it, if you want to sell people a story, it makes for a good story. Meaning, and this is the way that it was seen by many, that the purpose of the resurrection of the dead was sort of like to give you a type of guarantee, let's call it. Guarantee that your efforts in this world will pay off in the end. Meaning you may not see the reward in this world, you'll see it in the coming reality. And that's a very common understanding of what the resurrection of the dead is about and what it's trying to do. However, there are a number of things that don't fit with this. And exactly the thing that doesn't fit so much is that if it was so central to Judaism, to faith in general, why is it not mentioned very clearly and explicitly in the text of the Torah? So we have to play these word games. How do you punctuate the verse? How do you do the punctuation? Do you put the comma here, or do you put it there? To what part of the verse does the word "and arise" belong to? And it's that way about many of the verses. That these are like, not games, but they're definitely not clear and explicit statements of this concept of the resurrection of the dead. And so that sort of goes against the idea. If it was so central to faith, in that sense that this was the guarantor of that it's worth it to lead a good life, proper life, then why is it not stated clearly, more clearly in the Torah? The answer is that it's really not a guarantee. It's not meant to be a guarantee. It's not meant to give you a reason or some kind of consolation prize so that you decide to follow what the Torah says. The deeper reason for discussing the resurrection of the dead is because it changes the way you perform what you do perform. To say it another way, Maimonides, when he talks about the resurrection of the dead, he says this is part of Jewish faith. Dat Yehudit. Very interesting concept in and of itself. What does this mean? Dat Yehudit, Jewish faith. It's not even faith. It's more like Jewish, the word for religion. What is a Jewish religion? That in and of itself is a surprise that there's such a term that comes all the way back to the Middle Ages, because religion is something that's much more modern. So what is he trying to say? In Chassidus, there's a very important statement that says that when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you should do is recall the resurrection of the dead. It's a very interesting statement. By the way, we didn't get a chance to talk about this, I believe it was Monday or Tuesday, I can't remember when. I wanted to talk about more about the 4 levels of anistarot v'aniglot, the concealed and the revealed. And I didn't get a chance to talk about the difference between what we call hermeneutics and allusions, or drush and remez in Hebrew. So I won't talk about the difference now. I'll just say in short that remez, an allusion, means that you are supposed to look at life the way it is and extrapolate from it some greater understanding. Why is it that when you wake up you should be thinking about the resurrection of the dead? Because that moment of waking up, of being asleep and then rising again, and then suddenly having life again, coming back to life, as it were, entering the world again, is a hint, it's an allusion to the greater coming back to life that will happen after death with the resurrection of the dead. That's what you're supposed to get from it. It's an experience that we have every morning. And the person who has any kind of experience needs to know that by the Creator, these experiences are magnified 1,000,000 times more. So if there is such an experience by me, as a person, as a human being, of waking up in the morning, coming back to life, that exists even more prominently when it comes to the Creator, to God. And so the resurrection of the dead is not a promise about the future. It's something, first of all, that has to do with how I perceive my own existence right now. And to take my own existence, the love that I feel, the fear that I feel, the awe that I have, the amazement, the wonder, and so on, and to understand, and compassion, and to understand that all these elements of my experience are magnified 1,000,000 times more by the Almighty, that is the idea of remez, of illusions, understanding that what I am experiencing now is alluding to something greater in the infinite. Now, why should I remember this when I wake up? So first of all, it's because I'm experiencing it right now. But in Chassidus it's explained that not only should I remember it in the sense that I should understand that there is an extrapolation of my own experience that is much greater, but also to understand that every action that I take in my life will have in the end infinite, eternal status. I will have to live with all of it. I can do tshuva and get rid of the bad, but the good that I do, I have to feel that this good is going to accompany me not just now for this day, for this moment. It's going to accompany me for all time, for eternity. Because the good that we do, again, is also just an illusion. The good that we do, we feel it as something transient, something passing. But the good, when it translates into God, is something eternal. These actions that we take, they have eternal significance. The resurrection of the dead is really another name for what we call eternal life, because that's what will come after the resurrection of the dead. So the eternal life that I want to feel is that every act that I'm doing now, everything that I'm striving to do right, is not just something passing. Just like this day or the moment of awakening is not just something that passes. It is actually an allusion to something eternal, to something much greater, magnified 1,000,000 times. And so that gives me motivation to do things with greater sensitivity, with greater passion, with greater patience, with a greater commitment, because now I know that the good that I do now, however I do it now, will accompany me for all eternity. The bad will fall away eventually, because the bad in the end is extracted, whether through tshuva or through other things that happen. But the good stays eternal. And so when I pray this morning, I want my prayer to be something that I will be happy to carry with me for all eternity. When I do a favor for a friend, I don't just want to do it like, again. I want to do it with such pleasure, with such joy, that I will be proud to carry this act with me for all eternity, and so on. So really the point of understanding the resurrection of the dead and the eternal life that comes after it is not so much in order to give me some kind of guarantee about the rewards I will get, but rather to convince me that however I do things now, with whatever attitude I do them now, I will be carrying them forever. And so I want my attitude, we call this the Dat Yehudit, the Jewish religion. The attitude has to be one, should be one, that I will be happy to take with me for all eternity. So I wish everyone Shabbat Shalom, and hope to see you next week on Sunday for the last week of this year, 5783. Everybody should be well. Bye-bye.